Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Sunday, July the 20th. July the 20th. That is a very important date because it was 56 years ago today, roughly, I guess, in the early evening of that Sunday, July the 20th, that Apollo 11 landed on the moon. And I happened to be at that time, like a lot of people, watching it on television, completely consumed by the events of that day and all the experiences that had built up to that July the 20th, 1969. So, as we like to do with some of these historic moments and some of these days in history, we've invited our good friend Frank Burke up in Wisconsin. Hi, Frank. Welcome.
Hey, Sylvia, thank you. Great to be here.
Well, thank you so much. It's always so nice to enjoy these historic moments with you. There's really nothing for you to read today, Frank, because this, on,
That's fine.
no, I was just thinking whatever Neil Armstrong said was not very long.
No.
So it was, what was it? One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. I mean, that was about
Right.
the extent of what he said. Um, but I really love July the 20th and remembering Apollo 11. I really love it because I was really caught up in it. I was one of those who had built up my expectations to this day for quite some time. As I'm sure you remember, we used to watch these things in school. There was always a very nice teacher who would roll in the TV and we get to
Hmm.
see, the rocket going up. And every once in a while, we get to see the capsule coming down. So I, for one, was really caught up in it. I guess my peak interest was Apollo 8. That really got me started. I was really into that one. That's the one that went around the moon,
Yes.
where they read from the book of Genesis on December 24th. So, Apollo 11 was one that I was really looking forward to. And I was really excited. Like a lot of people, I said, I spent that Sunday afternoon. I remember, I think we were playing baseball in the early afternoon. I came in, I took a shower, and I sat down. I'm guessing about 4 o'clock or so.
Hmm.
And that's when the capsule began its descent. And I'll never forget, that moment when it was coming down, when Neil Armstrong said, "The Eagle has landed." Um, I mean, it was such an emotional moment for those of us who had been thinking about it. And then, of course, later when they walked on the moon, President Nixon spoke to them. So, Frank, I was all excited about this day. And, it was just one of those days that there's 2 days in my life that I can pretty much tell you everything I did. The day we left Cuba, I can go back to that day and remember when I got up and what we did and, the trip to the airport and all that kind of stuff. And this Apollo 11 days. So that's kind of my little intro. So what was your day like? What was your July 20th, 1969 like, Frank?
Well, I don't remember too many details. I know I was at home, and when the time came, we were all excited about it, and sat on the floor looking at the TV, and really praying that everything would go right, because there was a lot of worry about what was going to happen at that time. And we knew that the Russians had lost a couple of people in space. They never admitted it, but the word was around that that was the case. And I think, we knew it was such a risky undertaking. And you could see that, well, Apollo 13 was a good example of that. And it has not been without heartache. So you just hoped, you were very proud, very excited, and you hoped and prayed that everything was going to go right.
Right. And if I may just add another tragedy, Apollo 1. If
Yeah.
you remember, it exploded right there on the ground when they were
Yes.
training. They had an explosion that I think killed three.
Gus
Uh,
Grissom was one of them. Yeah.
yes, and so that was kind of like the way the Apollo program got started with that tragedy of Apollo 1. Um,
Mhm.
so you were at home,
Yes.
I'm glad to see that you were praying for them because I didn't think about that one. I I was kind of I don't know. I think I was kind of like a teenager waiting for the Beatles to begin at 7 o'clock on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Well, I think it was before that. There used to be a show on Desilu Playhouse. Desi Arnaz was the producer. He and Lucy sponsored these broadcasts. And they did one about a guy who goes up to space and they can't bring him down. And it ends where he's making an address to the people, in effect, talking to Earth before he dies.
Oh wow!
Yeah, they had a couple of things that were very, very, how can I put it, scary, I guess is the word, having been
Well,
a kid.
remember the Twilight Zone about the guys
Yes.
who go up into space and they crash
Yep.
and they're now in this alien planet
Yes. Yeah.
and you know I mean yeah I mean there were a lot of
There's a lot of, well, to put the frame, it's very important, I think, when you look at this, to look at the big picture
mhm.
and the fact that this was happening in the middle of the Cold War. And you had, the most of the rockets you were familiar with were military rockets. They were ICBMs. And there was a lot of fear about nuclear destruction and uh, what's going to happen. And so it was a great moment for peace, for um, for civilian involvement, although it was a military program that you could identify with the people involved. You could
Right.
identify with the astronauts.
Yeah,
And
I think so. You're right about that.
you have to look at it from the standpoint of 1957 when Sputnik first went up and the Russians beat us there, in
Mhm.
that instance. And then our first two rockets, Project Vanguard, exploded on the launch pad.
Oh yes.
And I think it was the Explorer was the Army's rocket. The Vanguard was the Navy's. The Explorer was the one that actually got off. But from then on, I think it was the competition, and I think everybody was excited because I can remember in class in high school um, when John Glenn made his three orbits around the Earth. They put it on the PA so that it went to every classroom and we could all hear. We knew
Wow.
history was being made. So,
One one advantage you had over me, Frank, is that I was not here in the United States when all those rockets were exploding.
uh,
Down in whatever it was called back then. It wasn't
Cape
called Kennedy,
Canaveral.
Cape Canaveral. Yeah. Um, so, I mean, I didn't remember it. That I know I've spoken to other friends who've told me about these. I remember one fellow one time said he stayed up until I don't know when, only to see the rocket explode or
Yep.
something like that right there on the launch. So I didn't actually experience that like you did and other people up here. We didn't when I was down in Cuba. We didn't get
Yeah,
news like
sure.
that. And by the time we got here in '64, by '65 you had that Gemini program,
Yes.
and I remember the walk in space. Remember that?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So most of what I remember of those early days until the Apollo 1 tragedy was a lot of success and a
Yes.
lot of excitement. But I got to tell you a funny story. For me, especially now that my parents have passed away, and you think about these things, and you my parents, I was sitting in the living room with both my parents, my brother and my sister, and my parents were like two little kids watching this because they had grown up at a time in Cuba where they used to sell these comics at the newspaper, the corner store where they sell coffee and newspaper.
Mhm.
So they used to sell these, and I'm sure they're Spanish translations of English comics, but they were comics about going to space and
Mhm.
stuff like that. And they grew up watching that or reading that. And then I think there was a movie, a black and white movie about going into space, or going to the moon or
Many of them.
something. Right. So that's what they had grown up. So for them, going to the moon was like completely outside of their radar. It's
Right.
like, oh my
Right.
God, this is never really going to happen, is it? So here they are, they're watching this. And we're watching this, and my dad turns to my mom and says, of course, all of this in Spanish, but I'm translating it for you.
Mhm.
I don't think our relatives in Cuba are going to get to watch this. And my mother said, yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. Which, by the way, later on, I learned that was true. They didn't get to watch it on TV. But anyway, so my mother looks at my dad and says, yeah, that SOB of Fidel Castro doesn't want to admit that the Americans, she used the word Yankees,
Uh-huh.
got to the moon before the Russians did. So that was her line.
Yes.
Okay, he doesn't want to admit that the Yankees got there before the Russians. Um,
Well,
anyway, that's one line I remember.
I will have to tell you my funny story about
Yes.
that. But it happened at the launch. And I was working in my first job in advertising. It was in market research for a small agency that later was absorbed by other agencies, etc. But the president was a man, tall, very military, big mustache, smoked a pipe. He had been on Eisenhower's staff,
Hmm.
and he never let anybody forget it. His office, the whole wall was pictures of me and Ike. That was the attitude, and real pompous guy. So they're getting ready to launch Apollo 11, and in those days they had little portable TVs that kind of weighed like 1,000 pounds. They were very heavy,
Right.
and they set one up in the conference room so that we could watch the liftoff. And everybody in the agency came in and crowded around it. And the president, he was a colonel. I may as well use it, Colonel Robert W. Robb. And he wasn't a bad guy. But he just had this bearing. So he was the last one in, and he had his pipe. In those days, you could smoke in the office, and he's
Yes.
puffing on it. And they have the countdown. And the one thing, everybody's holding their breath because how many times did you get to T minus 4, stop? Well, there's a hold, and it could be for 3 days.
Right. Right.
So the countdown went off 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition, liftoff. And the thing goes up. And then the jets were following it with cameras. And you're watching it, and the first stage falls away, and they're following it. And finally, it got too far out for them to follow.
Right. Right.
And they went back to the newscasters. And Colonel Robb just looked around and said, well, there's nothing more I can do now. Walked out.
That's good one, General Rob. Yeah. I
Yeah,
like that
exactly.
one. Yeah.
So that was my thing about it. But the funny thing is,
But I got to tell you another quick one, a very
yeah,
quick story, because um, Apollo they landed July the 20th, and I think they took off. I think it was the 17th of July. They took off on a Wednesday, I think. Or they landed on a Sunday. So I think they took off either on a Wednesday or a Thursday. And that was the summer of 69. And I decided to take a typing class that summer at Custer High School. All right. It's the only place nearby that I could walk to. And I literally walk, it was like 6 miles. I would walk every day or something to Custer High School. And so anyway, so I'm taking this typing class and I have this little transistor radio and I'm listening to the count, the countdown to takeoff, right? The
Yes.
8, 7, 6, and, and then about 10 minutes later, after the takeoff, there comes a flash, ABC special, one of those things they flash,
Right.
ABC special report, Apollo 11 on its way to the moon. And 20 minutes later, Apollo 11. I mean, you would get these updates,
Yes. Yes.
And I was eating it all up. I mean,
Yeah.
Frank, I was sitting there. I couldn't get enough of this stuff.
Yes. Yes.
And so I loved it. I have to admit, I really thought I really felt involved in this thing. I was really into it, Frank.
Yeah. Well, so was I, because if you look at that generation, okay, one of the things, we were very space conscious.
Yes.
And if you go back to early television, one of the most popular shows on early television was Captain Video and his Video Rangers.
That one I don't remember. That
Oh
must
my
have been
gosh.
that must have been before we got here.
I'm sure it was, because I was very small at the time, and I was
Captain Video and
his Video Rangers.
oh my goodness.
Yes, and it was all space related, and I believe it was on. I'm not sure if it was on every day or only Saturday mornings, but I wouldn't miss it. And kids, I remember having a ray gun, and they sold space merchandise, some of which I was not allowed to get. I really wanted the space helmet that had a special place on top for secret messages. But as my parents, who didn't want me to have it, I probably couldn't afford it, said, no, a kid in Brooklyn suffocated with one of those. There was always the kid in Brooklyn who died. It was an excuse for
when our parents wanted to deny us something, they would always come up with an example like that. Somebody died.
Yeah, exactly.
Doing
like Nancy
that.
Pelosi.
Yeah,
Every time there's a bill that Trump supports, her answer, and they all say it, is people will die.
People will die, yes. Yeah,
But,
we eliminate NPR, people will die.
Yes,
or
exactly.
whatever.
Yeah, I heard that. But anyway, we were all really into it. And then, of course, in the Cold War, the whole thing was about rockets, all the drills and the fallout shelters and that whole thing, that we were all living in momentary fear of being bombed.
Right.
And in fact, if you went to a Catholic school, the nuns ate that up, because I never knew a nun who wasn't waiting anxiously for the end of the world.
That's right. Yes. They all mentioned that in class, didn't they?
Absolutely.
Especially if you didn't do your homework.
Yes. The judgment is coming.
The judgment is coming. Yeah, that's right. But you mentioned, Frank, about Sputnik. Now, I don't remember Sputnik. That was October 57.
Right.
And but that really shook up the United States, didn't it, Frank?
It really did. It really did, because as I say, when it came out, people they had very little knowledge, none really, the basic public, of any of this or what it was supposed to do. And I can remember people standing outside looking up in the sky. Oh, I think I see it. I think I see it. Well, of course, you couldn't see it. And later on, when a rocket was sent to the moon unmanned, oh, I looked at the moon and I think I saw something
Right.
sticking out of it.
Right.
I'm not kidding. That's where it got.
Sure.
But the thing it did was suddenly it was a matter of our children are way behind. Russian kids, they're all geniuses in science, and our kids don't know anything but baseball. So
Right.
rock and roll, because take a swipe at rock and roll always. So
Yeah.
we ended up they started science classes. And, we had
Right.
these rather really bad science books. They talked, and even into high school, they would be talking about things, the home of tomorrow, and a line drawing of a woman with a garden hose in the living room, spraying the walls, ceiling, and all the furniture. Because the miracle fabrics, you see, were going to make it possible for her to do all of that, and the water would go down a drain on the floor, and life was just going to be so easy. So,
Right. Yes. Well, of course, you had the Jetsons. I remember them. The
yes,
Jetsons were kind of like Spage Age family.
yep,
Um, I remember Lost in Space. Remember that
yeah,
one? Lost in
yes.
Space. That was a great
Buck
show, actually.
Rogers.
Yes. Well, Buck Rogers, I think those were some of the comics, weren't they also?
Well, there
I,
were
I,
comics that became TV shows.
right.
And, it was, they were originally in the 1940s, they were serials that were shown with movies on Saturday afternoons for the kids' matinee.
Right.
Um, there was a tremendous, let me say, there was a tremendous consciousness of space, if not of rational astronomy.
Right.
You know, people knew very little about the moon or how we could get there or Mars. And, go back to 1937, I believe, October 30th, Orson Welles
Yes.
broadcast
Right.
about the invaders from Mars. And it really is, but it was a warped sense of space and space travel. And here we were, 56 years ago doing it.
Right.
And
Well, and you're right about the moon. I mean, I cannot tell you how many songs in Spanish that I grew up listening on my parents' turntable have to do with the moon,
yeah,
the romantic moon.
yes,
Uh, and I remember one very popular song, "Moon over Havana" and
yeah.
the shore,
Well,
and "Magic is the Moonlight," which was actually the English version of a Spanish tune.
uh-huh.
But so yeah, the moon was all over.
Yeah. Mel Torme
Songs,
recorded a whole album of songs about the moon. And one of his big hits was Blue Moon.
Blue Moon,
You
and
left me
that was
standing alone. Yeah.
that the one by Elvis too, right? Elvis,
Yes.
and then Elvis did this great one called "Blue Moon of Kentucky." I remember that one. That was really a great song. Moon River, of course. Who can
Yeah.
forget Moon River? And then the other one, "Everyone's Gone to the Moon," or "Everybody's
Yes,
Gone to
yes,
the
yes,
Moon."
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
everyone's going to the moon or
Yeah.
gone to the moon or whatever. So the moon was inspiring a lot of things. But I can tell you from listening to my parents that day, going to the moon or having a real man go to the moon was so far outside
Yes.
of their radar of possibility. It was like this is something they couldn't believe they were watching
Right. Right.
because they was so. But then Frank, then we go several times actually.
Mhm.
I think we got up to Apollo 18. 18 was the last one I think that went up, and then we stopped. And that's why I've always loved that article by Charles Krauthammer that came out in 2009 before he passed away. And that article is "The Moon That We Left Behind."
Yeah.
And not what we physically left behind, but the memories. I mean, we made such strides and such a national effort to get to the moon. It seems like after all of that, we said, I guess it's not worth it anymore. And we stopped. We haven't been but I mean, in '72, I think was the last time we went to the moon
Mhm.
in December '72. Now we've had the shuttle and other
Sure.
programs, but the moon is up there, and somewhere up there on the moon is that capsule and that plaque that we left. We came in peace for mankind. That's
Yeah.
what it said, and that flag that we planted. I mean,
Yep.
it just seems like all of that got left up there, and I I would love to see somebody go up there and just kind of look for it, pick it up, and bring it down to a
Mhm.
museum.
Well, I'll tell you, Sylvia, I've thought about that. And one of the things I think that created that made that happen, is the fact that, let me put it this way, where do we go from here?
Right.
After the moon, where do you go? Because they figured at that time that the moon was within the realm of our technology to successfully go to the moon.
Hmm.
But any of the other space bodies are a bridge too far.
Right. Right.
Mars, some of the other planets, Mercury.
Yeah.
Uh, First of all, you may not be able to survive on them.
Right.
The gaseous lumps in space. But I think the fact was that they figured out the people in the government said, look, the moon thing was great, and we were able to do that because, first of all, the 1960s were the height of the JFK adulation. And it was, well, JFK wants us to do this. And everybody was nuts about, JFK. And very little had come out about the problems with the Kennedy family at that time. He was regarded by some as a saint. I can remember a very mawkish picture they sold of Pope John the 23rd and Kennedy sowing the seeds of peace in a garden. It was that. So you had a lot of support for doing what he suggested and getting to the moon. But going beyond that was something that I think was beyond what people thought and what they could do at the time.
Well, I also think, Frank, and let me give you this idea. I think that had it not been for the Soviet Union competing
Hmm.
for getting to the moon, maybe we would have never done it the way we did it.
Right.
Because I always felt that underneath all of this, there was a sense that, hey, we've got to beat the Russians because
Yes.
this is a matter of national security. And we eventually, I was with a family. There was a social last night, and I was with a family from Romania, a couple from Romania, who remember this from their side from Romania, and they were telling me that what happened to the Russians or the Soviets was that they just couldn't keep up. That at some point in the trajectory to the moon, you know, they just couldn't keep up
Mhm.
technologically. They couldn't keep up with the money, and they just said, "Hey, you guys really want to do this? America, go find go to the moon because we
Mhm.
really cannot keep
Mhm.
up with you, Frank." That's
Yeah.
what they were saying. They kind of confirmed what I suspected.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of truth to that. You know, um, when I was taking macroeconomics, the professor, who was a very distinguished professor, he said there's one class you can't miss. And it was the class in which he defined how the Cold War and the government spending had really kept the Russian and the American economy as strong as they were for that whole period. And it got to the point where, hey, it was less for the government planners, it was much less about defense than it was about pouring money into these things, which sifted down and created a great deal of prosperity here and what prosperity they had in the
Right.
Soviet Union.
Well, and we got things like iPhones and a lot of things,
Yeah.
computers that came from that. Now,
Now, wait a
one,
minute. quick, I've got to stop.
Yeah, sure.
What was the first big thing that the public went crazy about because it came out of the space program and it was accessible to everybody?
Tell me, I forgot.
Tang,
Okay,
the
yes, yes,
instant orange juice.
right.
They were
And
using that when that came out. Wow, we're having
and
what the astronauts have.
TV dinners too, right? I mean, I used to
That was
remember.
before then.
Okay, because I remember getting to the United States and having our first TV dinner, and my I said to my uncle, I mean, why do people do this? I mean, why do they buy this frozen thing and put it
Right.
in? I mean, what is the point? Because they put it in a regular oven. We didn't have
Yes,
microwave.
exactly.
And my uncle looked at me and he said, "Well, that's what they do in space. How do you think they eat up there?" So I said, "I
It wasn't quite. I think the Salisbury steak would have taken off in the absence of gravity.
and you're right. And later I found out that he was pulling my leg, but he wanted to give importance to the TV dinner,
Yes,
and he
yes,
tried to make it into a big part of the space program or something. But but it was I don't know what when I sort of kind of like wrapping up. I remember talking to my father and I said, 500 years from now, they're going to be talking about this.
hmm
And I still think that way, Frank. I
uh-huh.
still think that just like we talk about Columbus was different because,
Yes,
they didn't have, they didn't have it on TV or whatever. And by the time they got to the islands in the Caribbean, I think Columbus was really happy to see land because they were
yes,
about ready to cut
yes,
his head off. But nevertheless, I mean, look, we think of whatever day that was, October 12th, 1492. We think of that day as
yes.
the day, and I just have a feeling, July 20th, 1969, that some kid is going to read about it in history books 500 years from now, Frank.
Oh, I think they will very definitely, very definitely. And one of the things that kept the program alive was the gradual way they led into it. For instance, Alan Shepard, space capsule goes to the edge of space and he returns. So now we know we can do that. Then John Glenn orbits 3 times. Now we know we can do that. Then we do the 4 days in space. We know we can do that. So it was a matter of progressing
Right.
up a logical ladder that led to the moonshot. And, it was not without its detractors. And I refer you to Barry Maguire and the Eve of Destruction. You can leave here for 4 days in space,
Right.
but when you return, it's the same old place. Hate
Yes.
your next door neighbor, but don't forget the space race.
Right. Yes. I remember that song. Very. That was a one-hit wonder, if there was ever one, wasn't he? Wasn't he? I
He
can't.
was, well, he was a member of the New Christie
Oh,
Minstrels.
okay. All right. So he had that other career.
Yes,
But as far as his own solo career, I think that's the only
I
one
think
he
that was
had.
it.
That was
That
it.
was
Yeah.
enough.
Eve of Destruction, one of those 45s that will forever be identified with the 60s. There's no way
Yes,
you can say Eve of Destruction was recorded in the 50s or in the 70s. You
no,
simply it's like, it's from that time,
yes,
and that's all that's all it can be. But I look back at it again, like I was saying, for me personally, I always thought I was very lucky to be alive that day
yes,
and that I was able to witness this and
yeah,
talk about it. Now, I didn't know that I'd be doing a video show with you 56 years later,
right.
but that of course I didn't know. But always felt that I would be talking about this because I always had a personal interest in it. But another funny thing about the moon program, it just reminded me. I think it was Apollo 14 or 15 that had this little, like a car that drove around
Mhm.
on the surface. I think it was 14. And so my father had this Cuban friend, very funny Cuban friend who was over one day, and they're looking at something on the TV, and this comes up, the fact that there's a little car up there, and my Cuban friend says to my father, he said, you got to hand it to the Americans. They go to the moon and they take a car with them. You gotta, I mean, and
Yes.
it made a lot of sense. I mean, who else but the Americans would take a car to the moon,
But I think one of the things about the moonshot, and if you put it in the context of its time, as time has gone on, I can remember my great aunt, who I've referenced her many times. She was born in 1875.
The one who ate ice cream on.
Now, that was my great grandmother.
Oh, okay, all right.
You can have ice cream 2 times a year, her birthday and the 4th of July.
I was talking to some friends of mine about your great grandmother, and they thought that was a great story. So your great grandmother has been exposed in Texas.
Well, she would be pleased, I'm sure.
Yes, I bet she would be.
But when you think about it, my aunt grew up in an era, and anybody from that generation, when wonders were uncommon. The phonograph, the telephone,
right.
the airplane, then the aspirin, penicillin, one after another, but slowly, it moves slowly. Mm-hmm. And we have become so saturated with technological advancements that we're not surprised about anything. And I think the moon landing was one of the last times that the whole public could say, gee whiz, wow.
Right.
Think about it.
No, I agree. And if you remember, there were in most countries, they didn't have TV like we had. But in most countries, they would put these screens on the wall, large screens.
Yes.
And people would literally be like at a park looking at this huge screen of the I think the whole world was really turned on by this. Whenever I've spoken about this with people of our generation from other countries who remember the experience and enjoyed it and have memories of it.
Yes.
They remember, oh yeah, Apollo 11. I was at home, watching it on TV, or I was reading about it. So it did captivate the international interest.
Yes.
In a way that was very positive, I thought.
Very much so.
And I always will remember July the 20th. And speaking of remembering, it's 4 p.m. when we're talking right now. So this is roughly the time that Walter Cronkite was starting to tell us about the countdown. So
yes,
I remember that. Frank, I want to thank you so much, as always, for joining us in these little episodes of Looking Back and enjoying. And I don't know, was there anything else that you wanted to tell us? Any other great grandmother stories that
well, she was a character indeed.
Yes, but, sounds like it.
I'll tell you one more great grandmother story.
Yes.
One quick thing. She died in the mid 1920s, and she specified to her daughters, I do not want to be taken to my grave in a motorized hearse. It looks like you can't get rid of them soon enough. So the undertaker had to go and find an old horse-drawn hearse and carriages and get the horses. And, her will was her will. So they did. And she had her horse-drawn hearse and whatever. And my mother always said, she was a little girl at that time, thank God you could pull the drapes in the carriages, because they were in a barn and they smelled of horse manure and everyone was holding their nose. But Grandma made it.
Yes. And she left you, I'm sure, with a lot of great memories.
Yes.
But I want to thank you so much for being a part of it today and reliving this amazing day. And when I was thinking about talking about this day, you were the first person that came to mind, Frank.
Well, thank you.
So
And I just want to say, God bless all those who were involved. God bless our country and the audience, and God bless America.
that's exactly right. God bless America. Thank you for your time, Frank.
Anytime, Silvio. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you so much. Our good friend, Frank Burke, up in Wisconsin, author, businessman, somebody who we enjoy talking to him a lot in these historical days. July the 20th, 1969, the day that Apollo 11 landed on the moon. And for those who were lucky enough to be there or watch it on TV, it was one of those moments. I will never forget it. I will never forget it. I remember everything about it. And it was just a lot of fun to realize what had been an ambition for some time. Frank was talking about that, and the buildup to Apollo 11. You know, like I said, watching these, like the Gemini and then the Apollo program, everything had been building up to this day. And when it finally came, and you saw Neil Armstrong on the moon, it was, it was incredible. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas. And we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.